I've talked to like people nowadays at 53 years old who are like, when I'm hanging off a rock face, that's when I feel the most alive. And I'm like, well, you don't feel alive when you're playing with your kids or you're kissing your wife. I think that's a real flaw, to be honest with you, to only feel alive when you're like facing death and overcoming that, and so I've never really seen myself as an adrenaline junkie. What thrills me about the mountain process or the kayaking or any of these big adventures is connecting with the right people and having this grand adventure. To me, I try to spin it and make sure that all these things I do are like a celebration of life and what our potential is, and not like, hey, I got to prove to the world that I can do this or that, or I'm going to defy death. I think risk, it's the gauntlet you have to cross through to get the reward of connection with your team. And we're out there doing something really special together.
Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where we talk with experts in the experience of being human, those who have taken the risk to realize their dreams and live fully. Today, we have Erik Weihenmayer. Erik became the first blind person to reach the summit of Mount Everest on May 25th of 2001. He has subsequently climbed the 7 summits, the highest point on each continent. He has also kayaked 277 miles through the Grand Canyon, through some class 10 rapids. Absolutely amazing stuff. We were just talking before we came on. He also passed the torch to me, actually to Muffy Davis, who passed it to me so that we could light the cauldron to start the Salt Lake City 2002 games. Erik, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. And you forgot to say that we're 5 days apart. We were mentioning as well. So
we were born 5 days apart.
I'm your slightly older brother.
He's a very slightly older brother, and I hope
we're Irish twins.
We are, yes, very Irish twins. This is amazing. When I look at all of the stuff that you've done, like climbing the mountains, kayaking, I mean, so many different adventures. But after I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, people would often ask me, how did you prepare to climb Kilimanjaro? And so there's a part of it where you think, okay, there's specific training, right? And there was a lot of specific training, but I often answer them with, it was all the mistakes that I ever made in my life that prepared me to climb a mountain, because you don't know what's going to happen. What would your answer be for the mountains that you're climbing? What was the preparation, or what is the thing that sticks with you that allows you to climb the mountains?
Well, you're totally right. I mean, like there's the physical training, there's the mental suffering training, and then there's the systems training. You're trying to be better at putting your crampons on and taking them off in weird situations when your fingers are cold, and setting up tents and all that stuff. So yeah. And then the mental toughness, obviously, like you go out and do like a 14,000 foot peak in Colorado in the snow in the winter, you don't have a chance in hell of reaching the summit, but you say, okay, we're going to be out 10 or 12 hours and we're not going to sit down, so you're training yourself to suffer and be okay with that. And then, yeah, obviously the physical stuff, train like crazy. And that's a whole science, of course. But you're right with the mistakes as well. I mean, man, when I first started this mountain climbing stuff, I was a school teacher in Phoenix, Arizona, and I hadn't camped out since, winter camping and Boy Scouts. And I was climbing a rock face with a buddy of mine. He was a substitute teacher, and he said, we should try something bigger. And I said, like what? And he goes, how about Denali? I'm like, well, that's a lot bigger than a rock face in Arizona. And I got really intrigued by the idea. I'm very impressionable. and so I was like, wow, what would it take to have this big adventure? And I think I was equipped for that kind of setting my sights on those big adventures because, like my dad, we just kind of had that culture in our family. My dad was a Marine. He was the captain of his football team at Princeton. He had 118 missions in his A4 Skyhawk over Vietnam. So he's just this absolute, don't quit kind of guy. And I think he instilled that in me. So when my buddy said we should try something bigger, I was like, sure, like let's talk about it. And so we went on this probably 12 or 15-month uh, preparation period where I was going to go from A to Z in 15 months. And yeah, I like when we went up Mount Humphrey the first time, we turned back because I lost a glove. And Sam yelled at me and he's like, dude, as a blind guy and on Denali, if you lose a glove, you're going to lose your hand. So this kind of stuff can't happen. So yeah, mistakes were critical in the beginning because they're like, baseball bats over the head. Like, okay, this isn't this is a no mistake zone when you get to the real.
Which is hard though, right? Because when it's a no mistake, when you say don't make a mistake, that's when it's the easiest to go and make a mistake, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and you have a good team around you. I had a really strong team. I had this guy Sam on Denali, and I had these three other friends. One of them got altitude sickness and had to turn back. But so yeah, you have a good team. So if you do make a mistake, hopefully your team can rally around you. I had another situation though that was like a critical learning period for me. We were on Mount Rainier training, and we were going to set up camp, and we're like just working on like setting up camp and cutting blocks in the snow and the ice for wind protection and stuff like that. And I was assigned to setting up the tent, and I realized that I couldn't set up a tent without taking off my gloves because being blind, like I orient myself with my fingers. And so I took my gloves off, and there was this raging storm, and these shards of ice would totally nail my hands, and they'd go immediately into like blocks of ice. And I kept putting my hands back in my gloves and beating them out and stuff. And eventually my friends came over and set up my tent for me, and I was just absolutely humiliated. I felt like, man, I'm letting myself down. What the hell? And I
And letting
after
your
that,
team down.
I went back to Arizona where I was a teacher, and I would sit there and, it's like 100 degrees. I'd sit there in my tank top and my mountaineering gloves in the field near my tent, near my school, excuse me. And I would work on setting that tent up and breaking it down and setting it up with my fat gloves on. And yeah, by the time I got to Denali, I could set up tents in any conditions, even in whiteouts and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of these things you learn are just absolute falling short at first, and then just going, okay, what's the critical thing here? And for me, it was like, look, I want to climb mountains. I don't want to be like kind of this blind guy stereotype getting dragged up the mountain and spiked on top like a football. I want to be able to contribute to the team. Like, I know I'm not the best climber or the smartest climber or the fastest climber, but I want to be able to contribute in some way to the team, even if it's to their morale or just getting a few inches up the mountain each day. So that was really important to me.
How does that work on a mental level? And I think they're two different things, right? As you're going up the mountain, you reach that point of exhaustion. You reach that point where you're freezing, but you have to keep going. And it's often about the story that you tell yourself that keeps you going, the reason, the purpose that you're going. But you also have that in the beginning because your learning curve isn't super steep, right? Being a blind guy, and you are completely blind. I mean, sometimes we talk about blind, and there are a lot of visually impaired people who effectively qualify as blind, but you are completely blind. And so
Yeah, my technical medical terminology is blind as a bat.
that's the technical. Okay, that's
Yeah,
good.
that's the technical. Yeah, way to say it.
But what do you say to yourself like when that learning curve is so flat in the beginning and you have to do this over and over and you want to contribute? Is it the same as when you get to that really difficult part and you think, I can't take one more step? Is it the same story that you tell yourself to be able to keep going, or how does it work?
Yeah, I wish I had like a silver bullet answer for that. I mean, because like when on my first mountain on Denali, I'd wrestled in high school and a couple years in college. So I knew about training and physical stuff. I really loved being physical. But on Denali, that first expedition, my first big one, I mean, yeah, there's one day where you were climbing up to 16,000 feet and coming back down, and on the way down, it was really cold, and all these the trail was kind of frozen, and there are these deep boot holes, and the sighted people can see where to exactly step. But for me, I had to feel every boot hole. And a lot of times I'd be off and I'd slide into these boot holes and like twist my ankle or like have like I was getting blisters on my heels and I was just getting physically just beat down. And I got back down to my tent. And I mean, this is embarrassing, but I went into my tent and I cried like a baby because I was like, I don't think I can wake up and do this again. Um, the beautiful thing though was when you're fit and kind of mentally there and you got a good team around you, you are able to wake up the next day and say, okay, I'm ready. I've rested and I'm ready to try it again and do it a little bit better. I don't know. So that's not great advice, but that's really the only thing I can say. And there were plenty of days where I would think, how far can you physically and mentally push yourself before you do fall down in the snow and just die, where you've tapped into every bit of reserves. You never want to reach that point. But yeah, in the mountains, you are flirting with that limit a lot. And so, a lot of people never figure it out and go over that threshold and get themselves in trouble or get hurt or die. On Denali, there was a woman who finally summited. I think it was her third try. And on the way down, she 1,000 feet down from the summit, there's a flat spot. She fell down and just died in the snow. She's, I think they might have recovered her body, but I kept thinking, God, I don't want to be that person. So yeah, you're exploring what those limits are constantly in the beginning, especially.
Is being that close to potential death, reaching this major challenge, is that when you're most alive? I mean, it's funny, like looking at your stuff, I went back and I was thinking about Rounders, the movie Rounders, where Matt Damon is playing poker and he was telling his girlfriend, it didn't go over very well, but he was telling his girlfriend that he was most alive when he was at the table, like he felt
Yeah.
truly alive. Is that how it works for you on the mountain? Like as close to death as you can possibly be in some ways is when you're most alive?
It's a really good question. I'm really glad you answered that because I haven't really talked about this too much, but like I have talked about this with friends. I think that is a dangerous, I think that's a dangerous mindset to have. I've talked to like people nowadays at 53 years old who are like, when I'm hanging off a rock face, that's when I feel the most alive. And I'm like, well, you don't feel alive when you're playing with your kids or you're kissing your wife or you're drinking a glass of wine with your good friends. Like that's I think that's a real flaw, to be honest with you. I mean, to only feel alive when you're like when you're facing death and overcoming that or and so I've never really seen myself as an adrenaline junkie or like somebody who's defying death. What thrills me about the mountain, connecting with an incredible group of people, and hopefully you pick the right people, and then you go through this experience together and you kind of start to answer the questions because in these processes you're full of questions without answers. So together you start to kind of pioneer these new systems and strategies and tools and ways of communicating and and you go through failures together like we talked about. You kind of flip the script and turn them into successes and you see that incremental improvement over the years when you commit and then you look back at one point and you're like, wow, look how far I've come here. To me, I try to spin it and make sure that all these things I do are like a celebration of life and what our potential is, and not like, hey, I got to prove to the world that I can do this or that, or I'm going to defy death or beat death. I mean, I think risk is the thing it's the gauntlet you have to cross through to get the reward of connection with your team, and we're out there doing something really special together.
It does seem like it is that community. And that for me, like climbing Kilimanjaro, the best part was the community, is working with that community with no barriers. Your motto is what's within you is stronger than what's in your way.
Yeah.
And and it is this sense of problem solving, but problem solving as a group. You talked a bit about your role and not wanting to be this blind guy that you spike at the top kind of thing. Like, we got him here. Okay, this is great. Now we can bring him back down. What's that like on a mental level? Because I know that I've gone through the same thing. Like going to Kilimanjaro, I did it in a hand cycle, right? And I was flying at 2.5 miles an hour. Like that was going uphill. That was as fast as I ever went, but I was training really hard to not be too far behind, to not drag the group down. Is there that mindset for you? Because like watching you cross the crevasses and stepping over the ladders and everything, I couldn't help but think you must be so exhausted
Yeah.
by the time you get off of that ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. I was crushed in the Kumbu ice fall. Um, yeah, I think, it's another really awesome question, because I feel like, when I went blind, of course I wanted to be independent. I didn't like people looking down on me, like I imagine it's similar in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? You have this like suspicion, especially, as you're maturing, that like people are looking down on me, and I'm like this egg that like cracked in the hallway, and it's gooey, and everyone's stepping around it, like not knowing what to do with this, and so I had those feelings, and I know those affected me, but I think what I realized was like, okay, independence is wonderful, and you should strive to be as absolutely independent as you can. But look, everyone needs help, and I need specific help as a blind person. So for me, part of the being a part of a team is like my friends start to learn where I need help and where I don't, and how to communicate with me. And sometimes, yeah, I do need extra help. And if I accept that help, then I can stay up with the team better than if I was just stubbornly independent. So, I guess that's a bit of a cliche, but yeah, like if you rely on people, you go way higher than if you sit in your basement and say, oh, I'm going to be independent. I think in a way, independence can hold you back. So yeah, I accept help on these mountains. And, with the work I do with No Barriers, I've helped people with every disability under the sun reach the summit of different mountains. And I think it's really fun saying, okay, how do we come together as a team and support them in the way that they need, so that they can be the best version of themselves, that they, kind of can flesh out their own potential. And for me, that's like what diversity and inclusion is. I know that's like the big buzz phrase now, but that's really what it is. How do we help people to not be on the sidelines, to give them the tools and the support that they need to be the best version, so they can contribute in the best way they can, and then we at the top can celebrate and share that connection, because as I keep coming back to this idea that like it's that feeling of connection that I think I strive for in the mountains. I don't really have this desire to go out and climb a mountain alone and not talk to somebody for 30 days. That's some people do enjoy that, but for me it's about the interaction with the team.
How much of it is about the dynamic sense of learning? You were talking about the Kambu ice fall, and what the first time you went out and climbed it, it was what, 13 hours?
Yeah.
And then the last time you did it in 5 hours.
Yeah.
And so believing that you can get from 13 hours to 5 hours is something that I'd imagine you can communicate to those other people who can't really see the possibility of what they're able to do. Is that dynamic part of learning a big part of what you're communicating?
Yeah, it is. But I mean, like when I got crushed in the ice fall, the Kumbu ice fall that first time, and it was 13 hours. by the way, I came up above the Kumbu ice fall 13 hours and I tripped over a tiny crevasse coming into camp. I was so exhausted. And my friend reached out to kind of like grab me, but he had an ice axe in his hand and he smashed me in the nose with his axe. So I came into camp like blood just pouring down my face. I felt like I was going to pass out. I might have broken my nose because I noticed that my nose has been a little crooked ever since then. But and I laid in my tent. I was so exhausted. PV, our team leader, he had to take my crampons off for me, and I just laid in the tent thinking, "Oh my God! I mean, this is I've gone way. There's no way I can bounce back from this." Like, but I've trained myself, and I hope this doesn't sound cheesy, but I call it the open heart policy.
Mhm.
Don't count yourself out. You never know, right? You got to keep an open heart. And so on Everest, I forced myself that night to say, I am not done. I'm going to have an open heart and I'm going to go back down to base camp. I'm going to rest for a few days. I'm going to regroup and I'm going to come back up with an open heart, not like jaded or like defeated. And so I think that for me has been critical in these processes. Like you don't know if you're going to break 5 hours, your 10th try up, but you're open to the idea. And so yeah, in the Kumbu ice fall, every time you go back up, and by the way, you climb Everest like 10 times up and down, setting up your camps and climatizing. There's just incremental improvement, like I'd figure out a little way to like feel my friend's hand to know, okay, that's the right rope to clip into. He doesn't have to say anything. Or to get to the edge of that crevasse and my friends tap where they want me to land and they don't have to talk too much. They're just tapping where they land. And I just know, okay, I'm at the edge. I'm going to jump, no hesitation, bam, stick the landing. I learned how to lock my crampons over the rungs of the ladders to actually be able to like make sure it was a secure step so that I could get across those ladders efficiently. So it's just incremental improvements in efficiency and communication, and then these systems that you're developing along the way. And yeah, all those stack up eventually. And so yeah, my last time up the Kumbo Icefall, I broke 5 hours. So yeah, I think it's just keeping your open heart.
Well, the open heart to me is a lot about this idea of sort of saying yes to the possibility. You
Right.
contrast it with being crusty, with being hard, and which in some ways people assume is being tough, right? This idea of being tough, but being and having an open heart, saying yes, is really being vulnerable, which sounds like a really strange thing to be on the mountain. Is there a spiritual part of climbing the mountain? Is that part of like a connection with the mountain?
Yeah, and you're right. And it is vulnerability. When you get to the summit of a mountain, in the movies, you pound your chest and you're like, I've conquered the mountain. As you know from your climbing and mountaineering experiences, when you're on the summit, you're crushed. You're a little bit nervous because you got to get down. You're hungry, you're cold, you're thirsty. You are as vulnerable as it gets. You're this tiny little wimpy human, cocooned by this little bit of Gore-Tex and down, and you're in this wild place that humans maybe have no business of being. It's a spiritual place. It's a temple, and so yeah, I think that vulnerability is a connection to the spiritual, and it's not beating your chest. It's saying, "Wow, like I'm a speck, and I'm connected to this infinite place." And I've felt that so many times in the mountains, on the rivers, like 6, 7, 8 years of training kayaking. You finally go through a rapid and it's massive, and you're riding that gauntlet between this waves just crashing up against the wall on the left and this huge hole on the right. And you just squeak right through and you're like, I'm not like fighting the river. I'm not like separate from the river. I'm not trying to beat the river. I'm kind of like connecting with it. I'm connecting with this place. I'm not looking at this experience through a window. I'm here. I'm feeling it. And you get through that experience and man, your mind is like glowing with this beautiful connection. And that's as close as I've gotten to the spiritual in my life. That's what I truly feel. God's never come down and spoken to me and said, Erik, do X, Y, and Z. But man, I feel the voice when I'm out there.
Yeah, you achieve this level of harmony, like with your community, with your surroundings. I mean, in some ways athletes talk about it as sort of being in the zone,
Yeah.
but but it is this sense of harmony where you're not fighting, because sometimes it seems like you are fighting. One of the guys who climbed with me when we were going up, he was talking about he had trekked in Nepal, and he was saying that when he was going with their guides there, their guides said that you never stand on the true summit of the mountain out of respect for that mountain. And obviously the mountain's going to be there forever, right? You think, oh, I conquered this mountain. It's like, yeah, you conquered this mountain, but it's going to be there for years and years and years, thousands of years after you're long gone. Do you think about that kind of thing of having the respect and almost being allowed to get to the top?
Yeah, when you're on a mountain or on a river, look, I don't really believe that the mountain has a spirit, like necessarily, like in a kind of in a primal way like that. But maybe it does. I mean, how would I know? But no, you definitely start to feel like the mountain is alive, and there's a kind of a life in that journey, and you have utmost respect for the thing you're doing and the place you're at, and you have to give utmost respect to it. And so I always think like you don't ever conquer a mountain. You sneak to the top while the mountain blinks, and the mountain has allowed you in a way to reach the summit and stand there for a moment and cry and celebrate and hug and take your photos, and then get the heck out of there and get down to where humans belong. But yeah, no, for sure. Like when I go to a place, I never want to climb the mountain right away. I want to get to know the place and get to know the people and just connect with it, because then I feel like I've done what it takes to now, maybe deserve a right to have a chance at reaching the summit. But if you just go in and use the mountain for your own needs, like, I just feel like it's a little bit disrespectful. I think it was a friend of mine that I was climbing with. He's kind of a cool guy from Italy, really smart, really spiritual guy. He said, do you go to the mountains to climb, or do you climb to go to the mountains? Meaning, do you like go to the mountains to discover something, or you're just kind of using it as your own personal playground? I think it's a good thing to debate in our minds.
Because it has to be personal too, right? This journey has to be personal. You talk about being a blind guy, that it's about shattering that perception of what it means to be blind. I feel like you and I are speaking a similar language. I often said, probably not as eloquently as you did, that I want to spread doubt, that I want people to doubt what they thought they knew so that they have to see it for the first time. But you're talking about it in a similar way. What does that mean to you to talk about shattering what it means to be blind?
Well, I think even at a deeper level for me, before you shatter the world's perception, you're shattering your own perceptions. We don't know what we can do. We don't know what we can achieve. You know what I mean? So yeah, you have that open heart. You go through and you have some big successes. You have some stunning successes. You're blowing your own mind first. and and then sure, it has a side result, which is like people then go, wow, I didn't know you could do that. So yeah, I do think it's like taking like a glass and shattering it into a million pieces, and then like, okay, now you have that doubt of what's possible, and then when the world rebuilds whatever it is, that glass is better and stronger and more beautiful. The door is now open for people now. So yeah, I think it is a little bit about shattering. It is a little bit about destroying what people kind of think as their sort of belief system, and then they're forced to rebuild it. And that's good for the world. It's good for people. It helps people to get out of the sidelines and into the thick of things.
It does get to be universal, doesn't it? It's this human journey of, when I watch you do something, I go, wow, that is super cool. I want to be a part of that. And especially when I'm looking at my own challenges through such a myopic lens, oftentimes, you give us a bigger lens with which to look at our world and go, wow, how do we, how do we, how do we make the most of our world? And does it have to be that universal journey? And maybe let me take a step back, because I think that sometimes you talked about the perception of that you have to blow your own mind before you can blow anybody else's mind.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's sort of a third thing. In some ways it's almost like there's the way that I see myself, the way that people see me, and then there's the way that I think that people see me,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
which sometimes I feel like is what you're talking about in terms of this blowing my own mind, is like actually giving other people permission to see me for who I am. Is that some of the journey for you? This idea of like, are you your own audience? Is it the people around you? And is it the way that you think you might see, that they might see you? To give you a really confusing question.
No, I think it's a great question. And, as I get older, I hope I'm getting more mature and more honest and truthful in terms of the way I see myself. And and maybe it's just a bit of a narrative that I tell myself, but I always look back to this moment when I had gone blind. I went blind a week before my freshman year in high school, and I bet I got led into the school as a newly blinded person. And, I just was like, all my friends were like, who is this person? Freshman year high school, everyone's vulnerable and they're looking at this guy they used to know. And now he's being led into the school, and people weren't so kind, and but it was partly because just the situation, and I remember sitting in the cafeteria at a table, and all my friends were over there like 30 feet away, just laughing and joking and having food fights. And I was like sitting there thinking, God, there's this vast expanse between me and the world. And how will I ever break through? How will I ever break through this brick wall? And I can't see through it. I don't know what's on the other side. And so, yeah, how do you separate that from now, like you reaching Kilimanjaro summit, or winning golds in the Olympics, or standing on a summit, right? Like, yeah, of course, you look at your journey, you go, wow, like, look how far I've come. I'm so grateful for all I've been able to do. You're making me teary-eyed, Chris.
I know, I appreciate it. I'm right there with you, Erik. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I remember watching a movie. I watched this movie one time called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, this guy has a stroke, and he has one eye that is open. And so we're seeing the world through this one eye, but he can't blink. And so then they're worried that his eye will dry out and will be damaged. So they actually stitch his eye together. And it was one of the most haunting scenes I've ever seen in a movie. And you're talking about kind of what I felt, in that it sort of paradoxically felt both claustrophobic and an abyss at the same time.
Yeah.
Was that, did they have an accurate portrayal of what it's like to lose your sight? And then how did you find that key, that kind of, that moment that sort of let you make sense of that world?
It wasn't like a grand revelation. I mean, it was this incremental thing, like even as fundamental as like at first I wouldn't use my cane as a blind person because I was like, I'm not some dorky blind guy, I don't need that, I'm not learning Braille, I was just like a stubborn little jerk because I didn't want to be blind. I hated the idea of being blind. And so I was a real a real frustrating person. And so one day I wasn't using my cane and very well, and I was walking down a dock, and I stepped off the edge of the dock, and I did a flip in the air, and I landed on my back on the deck of a boat. And I just thought, okay, that's the nuts and bolts of it. You better start freaking learning how to use this stuff, or you're going to kill yourself. So, so you just realize certain things are bigger than you. So that's the first step, I think. Secondly, I started like opening myself up, saying I have hope, and I want a sense of adventure, in my life. And so I'm just going to say yes to things because I don't want to sit on the sidelines. I don't want to be Donnie Dark listening to all my friends over there living, and I'm like, just in the darkness. And so I joined the wrestling team. My dad, my mom said you should get a guide dog, and I applied, and I got a guide dog. My dad said, hey, there's this recreational program for blind kids. That's, because blind kids miss out on ball sports. And once a month they meet in this place, and they go horseback riding and cross-country skiing and sailing and canoeing and tandem biking. And one weekend they took us rock climbing. Do you think I knew anything about rock climbing? I grew up in Connecticut. I drove up there. My dad drove me up there. I climbed this rock face. I was like a scrappy little fit kid. And I was feeling my way up the rock face going, wow, this is stunning. Like the pattern of the rock that I'm feeling with my hands and my feet. And I'm up high, and the space is all around me. And I'm way up above the valley. And like, I've just put everything into this. And I was like, this is living. This is fully adventure the way I define it in my mind. So yeah, I think it's just an incremental process of not allowing that brick wall that you can't see through to shove you to the sidelines and make you jaded and wall yourself off and create this kind of defensive crust around you that now there's just a bigger separation between you and the world.
Did you always have that sense of saying yes, that open heart? Was it the flip off the dock, landing on the boat? That, I mean, this is where you believe in a higher power, right? I mean, somebody's like going, this guy doesn't seem to get it. Let's see if we can actually teach him. He might be one who needs to get hit over the head a little bit.
Sadly, I've had to be hit over the head a lot to learn things. I'm a very slow learner.
But did you always have that sense of the open heart, or did you have to come to that to say, I'm making myself more separate. I need to be open to the possibilities, even and especially if they scare me, which they had to.
I mean, yeah, I think it's, I don't know. I just always had this fundamental fear I have FOMO disease, Chris, fear of missing out, For me, going blind, okay, I could deal with that, not being able to see beautiful sunsets and Van Gogh paintings. I miss that stuff, but I can live without it. I can find other ways to enjoy life. But for me, it was the idea of you have one life as far as we know, and I'm going to sit and waste it. It's going to be a life lived for nothing. I mean, how terrifying is that? That was terror in my heart, to just be on the sidelines. And so like I would force myself to go do stuff. I remember joining the wrestling team. I still viscerally remember that day where I decided to join the wrestling team, and it was so full of questions. I didn't know anything. And I just remember tapping my cane down the hallway. And I can remember that smell of that wrestling room, the dirty sweat socks and jock straps, that nasty, musty smell, just getting closer and closer and closer. I'm tapping away. And I opened the door, and I was in the wrestling room, and I'm like to sign up for wrestling.
What was the reaction from the coach when you came in, banging your cane against the wall, going through the door, banging your cane, and said, I want to join the wrestling team? What did the coach have to say when you came in?
The beautiful part was when I have blundered into these things, like when I blundered into the Arizona Mountaineering Club, you think like in the movies, it's going to be like, oh, blind cat can't do this, No, they met me with open arms. Those wrestlers were my best friends. They changed my life. Being a part of that team was everything to me. In fact, it's a kind of a funny story because the captain of the wrestling team was 100 pounds. He was like that's like one of the lightest weight classes in wrestling. And he uh, he would wrestle all the freshmen. There were like 8 of us. They'd wrestle us like, and his job was just to humiliate everyone. He was a state champion, really amazing wrestler, and he'd drag you out and just slam you into the mat. And then next guy drag him out and slam him into the mat. I think it was, just a lesson in humiliation like this. And he dragged me out and slammed me into the mat just like every other kid. And I thought, my God, this is my team. This is my family. I want to be a part of this. And yeah, so that really did change my life. That was my first team. And I think like, okay, blindness is important, but I found a place for it. It's not the most important thing. The most important thing is being part of this thing that's bigger than all of us.
You said it's your team, but it's where you belonged, I would imagine. Like for me, getting back to skiing
Yeah.
was where I felt like I had recovered
Yeah.
because I was reclaiming my life. It sounds like wrestling was that doorway that you went through and said, I belong, I'm back, I got slammed, and I love it. Was that?
Yeah. And then rock climbing, and then all the things I opened myself to, and then um, going out and going to a job conference and getting a job as a teacher and moving across the country to Arizona and starting a classroom, leading a classroom full of middle school kids who all could see, and knowing this is my team. And then, going and starting climbing and connecting with people who say, hey, I don't know anything about blindness, but I think you're cool and you seem to have gratitude, and I'll take you under my wing and I'll teach everything I know. We'll see how far we can take this thing. I'm no expert in blindness, and that doesn't matter at all. And so, yeah, I've just been so lucky to be connected with people, and in a really beautiful way. And I really have gratitude for that connection.
What was the reaction of the kids in the middle school? Middle school, for a lot of teachers, is the most fearful place to be. They're going through puberty, they're going crazy, they're trying to assert their independence, and they look at a potentially vulnerable guy in front of the class. How did that interaction work?
I thought the kids thought it was kind of cool, like, hey, this teacher is different, and we do things in this classroom a little bit differently. Like in my class, you couldn't raise your hands. Of course, I wasn't going to call on you. So the kids, I'd say, just speak up. But this is really a tricky thing. Even adults can't do it very well. We got to look around the room and let people speak. And when they're finished, you can speak and maybe reply and respond or add to what they have said. So we kind of worked on how dialogue works in a real world, not just raising your hands. And that was one thing. And then the kids would step up in ways that they wouldn't in other classes. Like they would write the equations on the board. They would pass out papers. They would help correct each other's quizzes. They would, fill my dog's water dish. And at first I wanted to be like, as I said, fiercely independent, as a teacher. And then I realized, no way, man, I have 30 sets of perfectly working eyes and perfectly working hands. Like this is what a team is. So yeah, my classroom was my second team after wrestling.
And they had ownership. I'd imagine that not only were they writing the equations on the board, but then they had to read to you whatever somebody had done with that equation to solve the problem as well, right?
Yeah. And it was a kid. I might butcher this story, but if I remember correctly, this kid, he was Sikh, and which is a religion, and he um, wore a turban, and he told me, he's like, he told me, Mr. Weihenmayer, like I um, I feel a little bit self-conscious because Sikhs, we don't cut our hair. My hair like goes down to all the way down to my waist. And I said, well, why don't you come in and kind of do a show and tell, and tell the kids about the Sikh religion. So he did. He came in with all these cool like artifacts and weapons and swords and stuff. And at the end of the show and tell, he whipped his turban off, and this hair went pouring out down to his waist. And everybody was like, "Whoa, cool!" And that guy turned his narrative into power. And I thought that's what we got to do as disabled people. Turn our stories into power, man. Fuel, right? Make that narrative purpose and power. You know, it's not weakness. It's it's different, but it has its own advantages.
It does have its own advantages, and that to me was always a challenge in some ways, turning that into power, because we have power in some ways, like with regard to a group. I mean, you and I have both done adventures, and I think that part of what we've been able to do is achieve things that people thought were impossible.
Right.
And you get accorded a status as a result of those achievements, but it's not necessarily personal. Sometimes it can almost, I mean, you talk about building a team, but for me, I felt like in some ways it could separate me, because there's sort of this superhero kind of image that you're different than everybody. And you're like, okay, I came into this and I thought I was different because of what had happened to me. But then as a result of what I've done, I can be different as well. How were you able to bridge that gap? Because bridging the gap for you is something that's really important. How were you able to bridge that gap on a personal level, like with a personal relationship? Was that harder?
Well, maybe this is the same for you, Chris. I mean, yeah, it's so easy to get sucked into this kind of celebrity thing where you're exceptional and, look at me, and everyone kisses your butt, and so it's so easy to get sucked into that. And, sometimes your family, your kids, well, the people that actually know you are like, yeah, you're not that. uh, so that's nice to have that. But I've always felt like, yes, it's so easy to fall into a bit of that snobbery, because a lot of people are striving and they'll never climb Everest or Kilimanjaro or whatever the stuff we've done, but they're living exceptional lives because they're pushing and they're reaching a little beyond their comfort zone. Like perfect example, I think, is like at the No Barriers Summit, which just happened in August. We had about 500 people up to Estes Park. And you spoke at one of our summits in Salt Lake City.
Park City, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, in Park City, yeah. But so Estes Park, we have 500 people, a lot of people with disabilities, every disability under the sun. And our participant, Melissa Simpson, she's got cerebral palsy, and she's in a wheelchair. And her No Barriers pledge was to walk across the stage. And she trained for 6 months with her physical therapist walking. And she got up, we got her up on stage in a wheelchair. She stood up, which is incredibly hard. And she was on a walker. And I was to her right, and my buddy was to her left. And she walked 100 feet across the stage. And it took like 6 minutes or something. And she's real wobbly, but she's just totally forcing herself across the stage and so proud. And the audience just stood up and cheered. That's her Everest. It doesn't have to be this elite bullshit, it's just walking across the stage to me said everything that No Barriers is, right? And because that was such a stretch, such a risk for her, and she had an open heart and she did it, and people just stood up and cheered, and it was the highlight of the whole summit. And so that's all I ask of people, right?
Is that sense of having an open heart, having that goal. Is it getting closer to something? I mean, you've climbed so many mountains, and the mountains are both real and proverbial, right? And looking at the kayaking through the Grand Canyon and looking at these class 10 rapids. I mean, I was there with you as I was watching the movie. Like I was scared. I might have been more scared than you were watching the movie. And obviously I know that you've made it through.
I was pretty scared.
But it's I was reading a book on the Dalai Lama a few years ago, and the guy who was writing the book was interviewing His Holiness, and he said, so what's enlightenment like? And as the reader, you're thinking, okay, this is cool. Like, I want to know what enlightenment is. And he said, His Holiness said, enlightenment is the top of the mountain. I'm not there, but I know that I'll get there.
Hmm.
Is there something like that for you where you feel like you're getting closer to something? You're trying to reach something.
Look, I love the mountains. I love the rivers. I have a great respect and love for them, and I enjoy what I'm doing. And I'm not out there just to prove that blind people can do this or that. I mean, that's secondary, to the process. But um, when you and when you get to the summit of a mountain, it's not like, you some voice comes down and speaks to you and changes your life, right? Like there's nothing magic to standing on the summit or kayaking a river. um but it is a catalyst, right? It does bump you into this great adventure that gets your mind, that breaks out of it is a great process that breaks you out of your like normal day-to-day patterns and gets your brain working in an absolute new way, in a new, lens that you're looking at the world through. So it's the mountains, the rivers, these beautiful places can be incredible catalysts to understanding who you are and your potential. But eventually you got to take that home, you know. I you got to, I think, like come down the mountain and take the gifts that you've earned through your struggle and figure out what those are and say, how do I access these gifts at home when I'm sitting on my couch playing my guitar, having a beautiful day out rock climbing with my friends, or maybe having a nice dinner party, celebrating somebody's birthday, which we did the other day. How do I access all the things I've learned to like bring it home to my daily life? To me, that's really important, so that the mountains and the rivers don't become kind of a separation. They don't become like escapism because I can't handle the real world. And so for me, I've been trying to, in my second half of my life, bring it home and say, why can't I access these beautiful feelings and connections? I don't have to go to the ends of the earth to do it.
It's a great reminder. We learn things. It's this fundamental kind of experience, right? When you're in something that is that difficult, you learn things on a fundamental level. But to be
Right.
able to bring those back to your personal being, to learn that absolute, and I mean, some of it for me is trying to hold myself to that same standard in my everyday life. And that's what you're talking about in terms of the open heart. And for me, in some ways, it's this idea of, I call it realizing possible. it is
Yeah.
it is winning the battle with myself. It's that small little battle that, when I want to quit, when I want to, when I'm just frustrated, or when I want to panic, or whatever it is, to say, no, this is that battle. This is, because sometimes we just think our reactions are just chemical, and it's like something happens and we react, and it's like, no, I have the ability to determine how I'm going to react. How about on the risk side of things? This idea of sort of shattering the perception of blindness, do the risks have to keep getting higher? Because you've done some things that are fairly risky. I mean, my friend Kevin Zott one time, who's a blind athlete. I don't know if you know Kevin. He was a judo guy, and he was playing golf with some of the sponsors, and there was water in front of him, and they're like, "Oh, watch out for the water." And he said, "You can't fear what you can't see." But you've said that a little bit differently, that you have to have some awesome respect for what you can't see. Those, yeah, you don't want to fall into a crevasse somewhere.
My friends will be like, all right, I know you can ski this face, buddy. I know you can do it. Just don't fall. Don't fall. Okay. Just, it's a no fall zone, but you can do this. And I'm like, but I can't see what I'm about to do. I'm freaking scared. so, so I don't know. I think the fear of the unknown is scarier than the stuff you can see in some ways. But anyway, I missed
The
the connection.
question is, does the risk keep going up? Because you and I are about to have our 54th birthdays,
Yeah.
and we're getting older. They talk about 8,000-meter peaks. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, kind of thing. And how do you manage that risk as you continue to grow and stretch yourself as a human being?
It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, and I think like people get themselves in trouble, because you climb Everest or you do some big thing and you're like, I got to top that. I got to do something harder and riskier and scarier. And I think that's a dead end road, and it leads you to death or getting injured or, lack of fulfillment in a way because you're just trying to up the ante all the time. It's funny. People will always be, writing me and like, hey, I got the next adventure for you. I want you to I want to, I have this really cool catapult and I'm going to put you in a Velcro suit and I'm going to catapult you through the air. And I have this giant wall and you're going to stick to the wall. I'm like, you're stupid. I'm not like some blind Evil Knievel guy just looking to do silly things. Like these adventures have to mean something to me. They have to teach me something. They have to be special and meaningful to me to go through the risk and the effort to make them happen. Because as you know, it takes so much hard work to make these things happen. So you got to really care about what you're doing. And so, yeah, I don't think like as we get older, we're not going to be crushing the world physically as we were when we were younger. That's just probably a reality. But to me, the question is, okay, where do I move in my life where I'm evolving and I'm challenging myself at the appropriate in a way that fits like where I am, the stage that I'm in my life right now, you know? And so PV, my team leader on Everest, asked me that, like he said it in such a cool way. At the end of Everest, PV team leader, he pulls me aside and he says, hey, Erik, I want you to do me a favor. And I just thought it was going to be like something like, here, sign this flag or something like that. And he goes, don't let this be the greatest thing you ever do. Do me a favor. And so I think what he was saying is exactly what we're talking about. Like, let's not just put this on our resume and then like, I don't know, just like put it, just kind of hang on that and hang your pictures and put your trophy on the wall and say, okay, look what I did, but kind of use that experience organically and integrate it into your life as a way of like moving forward into something new. And so, like that statement and climbing Everest and all that stuff led to no barriers. It led to the Grand Canyon. It led to adopting my son, Arjun, from Nepal. These things have to lead you in directions that are meaningful in your life. It's not just about topping yourself for the resume, I think.
No, I think so. And it was interesting when you were talking about climbing for the first time back with the recreational group. And as you were describing finding the handholds and feeling the contour of the mountain, I mean, that to me was you were describing beauty. I mean, it was an aesthetic. I learned at one point fairly recently, learned how to draw. And in learning how to draw, and I'm not great, but it changed my perspective going through all of these exercises. I started seeing things differently and seeing beauty where I hadn't seen beauty, where you go, oh, that's an absolutely beautiful ear. Like
Yeah.
whoever
Isn't
showed
that
them an
awesome?
ear was beautiful, like, but you see it through a different lens. And it sounds like that's what it is one, it's easy to portray what you've done in a risk-taking way, but the thread that keeps coming through it from you that I'm hearing is about the beauty, is about having the cliff on one side and having the hole on the other side in the river, and being able to be in harmony and thread that needle to be successful
Yeah.
on the mountain. So it sounds like the next thing is not necessarily the biggest possible risk. The next thing is the thing that brings in a greater beauty and a greater sense of purpose. That's what I'm hearing from what you're saying?
100%. Just to parallel your drawing story, in COVID, I said like, look, I'm not going to come out of this just, behind. I want to figure out what can I do in this COVID quarantine to, do something that I may have not done otherwise. So I started playing the guitar. I stink at it, but I love it. I mean, I play till my fingers are almost bleeding. I love it. I could do it all day long. I wish I had started 30 years ago. And I just love it. It just brings me such joy. It's like, it's the same as climbing. You're devoting yourself into this process and just little tiny incremental improvements. And I love that process. So yeah, it's for me in the second half of life, it's finding a way to integrate, finding a way to, as you said, like be in harmony, find greater connection, to feel more empathy in the world, to feel more love. And I still love climbing and kayaking and doing all these things. I think I'm just as hardcore as ever, but I think I'm starting the awareness is starting to expand a little bit more to like the bigger picture, I guess.
It is, and maybe this is leading to this next question. Your answer is leading to this next question, because I watched some of your TV show, Welcome to Earth.
Yeah.
And the thing that struck me about that, especially knowing that you were blind, is how beautiful it was. So the visual part was absolutely spectacular. Is that some of what you're communicating to the rest of the world, kind of the beauty that you're seeing through your interaction to be able to represent that to the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have sight. I don't have eyes. I mean, people get spectacular beauty from their eyesight, that you see in HD, you see billions of pixels. It's awesome, but I don't have that. So I have to be able to explore and understand the world and get beauty from the world in different ways with the senses I have. So like, yes, going to this volcano, Yasser, in the island chain of Vanuatu was spectacular. It was a blind man's dream to be able to stand on the rim of that volcano and listen to truck-sized magma bombs explode out of these vents into the sky and then splash back into the lava and hear the lakes of lava reverberate and like create like waves, like an ocean that crash up against the walls of the caldera. It was like a laser light show, like a fireworks display, like all in my mind and kind of like crashing through my body. It was so intense and so beautiful. I could have sat on the rim of that volcano for days just listening to all the nuance of the soundscape below me. So yeah, for sure. I mean, those things are just gifts that fill you up, yeah. So maybe that's a good message for the world. Use what you have to connect and find beauty and joy, because we're all missing things.
Beauty, joy, connection, and be able to communicate that to other people, which is what I'm taking from what you're doing, is that you are willing to take the risk to do something that is really difficult, but also to be able to communicate what it means to be human to the rest of us. So to me,
Yeah.
I look at that and say, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and keep doing it.
Well, think about this too. Will Smith, who's like this world megastar, I mean, just what a life he's got.
Right. It was part of the show with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we stood on the rim of that volcano together, we were just two human beings going, both like little children going, oh, whoa, whoa. So I may never meet and hang out with Will Smith ever again, but that moment I mean, that was incredible. The two of us, two people just experiencing this insanely beautiful and intense thing with awe, sitting there together, like arm in arm. I mean, it's really powerful.
It is really powerful, but I also really enjoy your message of saying, take that powerful to your everyday.
Yeah.
Don't make it separate, because otherwise we're chasing we're chasing the next great high in a lot of ways, as opposed to kind of being open to the joys of life, which really can be in the simplicity of life as well.
Yeah, and maybe I don't want to get overly preachy here, but like one of the elements of no barriers that we created this curriculum around it, and one of the sort of fundamental elements is this idea of vision. Maybe a little cheesy for a blind guy to talk about vision, but I mean, for me, vision is not seeing the future. It's not saying I'm going to go climb this or that or do this or that. I mean, that's a goal. The vision is deep. It's fundamental. You know, it's that whatever, that human spirit, that light inside you that says, this is the kind of life I want to live. And so like people look outwardly to like things. And for me, I've always been driven by that thing inside, you know, the thing I want to grow and build inside me, you know, that says, I want to live a life of adventure. I want to be connected with humans. I want to love fully. I don't want to be imprisoned by my own fears. Like these are fundamental things that I always turn inward and look for when I'm scared or feeling lost, because those are your compass.
They are, and it's back to what we were talking about earlier, where it is that sense of vulnerability, of, you know, not fortifying yourself, but being willing to be vulnerable and open, have that open heart, and actually experience life. So
Yeah.
Very cool. This is awesome. Well, Erik, we've got to get you out of here because you've got to get onto a plane pretty soon. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story and for what you're doing, and how many people, all the people that you're helping, all the people who come in contact with you are the people you're helping. But I know that it's not a one-way kind of deal, that they're helping you as well. So thanks for all you're doing for the community.
Thank you, friend. And Chris, you know, like just even all this talk about connection and stuff right now, man, I just feel really connected with you and your story. And, you know, like, I think like we're running out of time. So yeah, let's connect in some way. If I can help with any of your adventures, or vice versa, you know what I mean? Like it's beautiful uh, to do something together, maybe down the road. You know, and then definitely I want to promote no barriers, get people to come out to our programs and so forth, and maybe we could get you involved in some of that stuff too.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's keep this conversation going. I would absolutely love to do something with you, and keep up the great work with No Barriers. And for people, they can go, what is it, nobarriers.com, isn't it?
NoBarriersUSA.org.
Nobarriersusa.org. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
All
So
right, thanks.
thank you so much. I really
All right,
appreciate
cool.
it. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed a wonderful conversation with Erik Weihenmayer. He blows me away, and I felt a greater and greater connection to you, Erik, as we went along. So hopefully all of you enjoyed it. Please tell your friends. Please like us. Please follow us, and we will continue to bring great content to you. Until next time, thank you very much. Take care. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.